Hey everybody, welcome back to Young Engineers of Today. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Spent some quality time with family and had some good food and all that stuff, or did something fun or whatever. Hope that was all good. We're gonna actually move on to an entirely new topic today. That topic is going to be bioengineering, and specifically, for the first time at least, neurobiology. But we're going to be doing a lot of bioengineering stuff, at least over the next few lessons, and just sort of introducing you guys to that, and yeah, stuff like that, in addition to other things. Pacemaker is definitely an example of that kind of thing. But yeah, we're going to be going over all that kind of stuff and sort of exposing you to this branch of knowledge and seeing if you find it interesting or whatever, and what you can do with it, and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be definitely more lecture based than our previous lessons have been, which is saying something, because a lot of our classes generally include me talking a lot. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully you'll find something interesting in here. Hopefully you'll find something that sort of gives you that spark. Otherwise, if it ain't your thing, don't worry. Give it a couple of weeks, and we'll be moving on to something new anyway. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get started. So like I said, bioengineering, this specifically neurobiology, well, and a bunch of stuff in that as well. Unofficially, this is called robotics to cyborgs. So we're kind of running the gamut here in this lesson. It's going to include advancements in biology, as well as advancements in computing, and then stuff about cyborgs and neurobiology as well. So we're covering quite a bit of topics, number of subjects. Special thanks to Dr. Ian Browner for making this presentation. So if you find anything interesting here and you want to know more, Dr. Browner is actually somebody who is an instructor for young engineers during the summer, and he does a lot of the cyborg-based camps and stuff like that. And he's definitely a really interesting guy. He's a lot of fun to talk to. That's an excellent question, Jacob. I believe it's PhD. Although there is definitely a medical aspect to what he does. Although I do think it's PhD. Anyway, yeah, a lot of college. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about Moore's law and microprocessor transistor counts. That's an excellent question, Jean-Marc. I don't know. I know they've had it in the past, but I couldn't tell you right now whether or not they're going to have it this year. A lot of people freaked out over that, though. So, that was an interesting thing. But yeah, so Moore's law basically states that about every year and a half to 2 years, the number of transistors that exist on any given sort of piece of computing hardware doubles. In this case, this specific case, this is processors. I was trying to find the word for it. This is processors, and there's actually a pretty clear-cut graph showing the relationship between the two. So down here in 1971, you start out with the 4004 processor with 2,300 transistors, and all the way up here in 2011, you got the 10-core Xeon Westmere EX. It's got almost 2.6 billion. 2.6 billion with a B transistors. So it's pretty impressive, something like the processor that exists in your computer. This is sort of an illustration of the power of exponents. When you double something, the number wildly spirals out of control into just these gigantic values. So, you know, I mean, even to take an example, you start out with 2, you double it to 4, you double it to 8, you double it to 16, you double it to 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096. You know, in a few steps here, we've gone from 2 to 4,000. We started at 2300 with, you know, this particular brand of processor, and 2.6 billion roughly 40 years later. It's a pretty big jump. I remember when the Pentiums came out as well, and 386 and the 486. Those were big deals. And then the Pentium came out, and everybody went, "Whoa, Pentium!" And then the Pentium 4 came out, and everybody was like, "Whoa, Pentium 4!" And then dual core processors came out, and everybody was like, "Whoa, dual core processors!" And now we have, it's pretty standard to have like a 6-core, 4-core processor in your computer. Like I said, the Xeon West Muri X, 10 cores. AMD, I opted to buy the 6-core processor instead of the 8-core processor. You know, the inexorable march of technology. It's pretty impressive. In case numbers don't exactly speak to you, we've got this little visual graph which represents, oh nice, yeah, there you go. We have this little visual graph which represents sort of the number of transistors and the processing power and millions of instructions per second that are different between different processors. Again, up here we have the 4004 and the 8008, so 4004 and 8008 down here. They've got the 8080. The 8080 is, here it is. So like the first 3 down here, and then we jump up to the 8086 and the 286 and the 386 and the 486, and here's the 386 and the 486 that I was talking about here. And then you got the Pentium and the Pentium 2, which again, Pentium and Pentium 2, again, right about the middle of the graph. Pentium 3, Pentium 4, now we're getting up here, and even this is not even as far down the sort of the graph. Well, yeah, I mean, that this is probably taken from an Intel ad because these are all Intel processors. The 386 and the 486 Pentiums, and the 286 probably because it follows the same numbering convention. And I'm not as familiar with the 80 series or the 40 series, but you know that's probably also likely. So more than likely, this is an ad taken from an Intel pamphlet or something like that. So it wouldn't include anything about AMD unless it was directly comparing them and saying that like Intel was better or something like that. You know how it is. But yeah, so up here we got 1971. Down here we got about 2000 at the bottom. And just visually you can see that there is a massive difference in both processing power, computing power, the number of instructions it can perform per second, and the number of transistors. But yeah, so it's just something to think about. However, we've had a sort of looming problem with Moore's law, and that is we don't know how far we'll be able to go with it. So far, everything is held up to Moore's law, but we're running into a very significant engineering problem. Let me see here. No. Okay, we're running into a very significant engineering problem here, and that is as things do calculations on the computer. They're doing calculations because electricity is running through them. As electricity is running through them, some of that electrical energy is being converted into heat energy. Dissipating heat energy, well, you've got a few different ways to do it. You can do convection, you can do conduction, and you can do radiation. Generally in computers, you rely on some combination of the three. A lot of times the components radiate heat, or they're conducted onto a heat sink, which then radiates the heat, and then the air is moved around with fans in order to, sort of keep the temperature inside cool so the computer can continue operating at least the minimum operating, temperature. Ideally, it's sitting well within the comfortable range, so you don't have to worry about components burning out or anything like that. But at least within the minimum operating temperature, so you don't start losing performance and stuff like that, because that will happen as well. As a computer's running too hot, it'll be running too hot to be running efficiently, and so you'll actually lose performance. In addition to that, a lot of components are also built to throttle their performance so that they don't overheat themselves. So you'll run into a physical as well as a created constraint on components as they heat up. Now, generally, radiation is what components rely on in order to get rid of their heat. In order for radiation to be efficient, you need to have as much surface area as possible in order to radiate that heat off of it. Basically, the more surface area there is, the faster you radiate away the heat. However, as you make things smaller, as you might have guessed already, you make the surface area smaller. We're fitting more transistors onto processors and things like that because we're making the transistors themselves smaller. We're running into an issue now where the transistors are small enough that we're actually worried about them being able to radiate the heat away. Yeah, like in an efficient manner. That's becoming a serious concern in processor manufacturing and GPU manufacturing and memory and things like that, is the fact that the transistors are becoming so small that we can't reliably dissipate heat from them. In addition, the transistors are becoming so small and so close together that we're actually increasing the risk that there's going to be like a random electrical jump from one area to another, a short circuit. That won't necessarily damage the computer necessarily, but will make it operate in unexpected ways. So you actually increase the number of sort of bugs that happen in the computer because the transistors are so close together that things can bridge that electrical gap much more easily. They'll be able to affect each other with electrical fields. And it's super interesting, but it's also a very real problem that we're running into. So, there are various solutions that have been proposed for that, increasing clock speeds and stuff like that, making the computers calculate faster, making more efficient sort of sets of transistors and stuff like that, because basically calculations are done by arranging transistors in a very specific way and the computer interpreting the results. If we can make those arrangements of transistors more efficient, be able to do calculations needing fewer transistors and less time, then you can kind of sidestep the whole Moore's Law issue because you don't need to worry about putting more transistors on the computer. In fact, you can put fewer on there and then further advance that by developing a chip that has maybe the same number of transistors as the previous one. We're also looking into multiple core processors, multi-core processors, like we've got in our computers. That's another way that we've been attempting to sidestep Moore's Law, is by having parallel computing instead of serial computing like we've had in the past. I call it serial computing, like there's multiple processors that are performing in serial. Single core computing, everything's done one at a time. If a computer is doing multiple things, like for instance, you have a browser window open and you're listening to a lecture, what's actually happening is the processor is flipping between those two tasks and performing some stuff each time it flips between those tasks. So it might be like, okay, so I'm going to decode a little bit more of the audio file that is, or the audio stream that is currently incoming, and then I'm going to go back over to the browser and I'm going to make sure that nothing's updated. All right, I'm going to go back over to GoToWebinar and decode a little bit more of the audio stream, and I'm going to go back over to the operating system and make sure that stuff's being put into memory like it's supposed to. And I'm going to go back over to the browser and make sure nothing's been updated. Oh, something's been updated. I'm going to start updating it. I'm going to update it a little bit though, and I'm going to pop back over to GoToWebinar. You get the idea. Your computer is actually switching tasks millions of times a second, and it's happening so fast that you cannot tell, which is pretty amazing. Multi-core computers, though, and programs that are written with parallel computing in mind, they'll assign a task to each of the processors, and then the processors will just be devoted to working on that task, and they won't switch between tasks like what's happened in the past. So one core will be focused on decoding the audio stream from GoToWebinar. Another core will be focused on just watching, you know, the browser window and making sure that like nothing needs to be updated and updating it if it does. Another one will be focused on doing operating system tasks. You know, writing log files to some folder in the operating system, doing memory management, swapping things around, scanning the hard drive and indexing things, stuff like that. There's a lot that happens on a computer at any given moment. It's doing a lot of different stuff, and sometimes you need to take a step back and sort of look at it in order to appreciate what exactly goes into making a functioning modern computer, because it's a lot, and it was all built by, you know, millions of different people, at least hundreds of thousands of different people over many, many years, all sort of putting their hand into the soup and adding their own special touch to it, so to speak. Anyway, I got on a bit of a tangent about computers there, just because that's something that I personally find interesting. Because, you know, what would I be doing teaching this class if I wasn't a huge nerd too? But yeah, so that's sort of the thing that we're running into now, is we need to sidestep or figure out some way of thwarting it, because right now it is currently thwarting us. The rate of change, though, is increasing, so that's the other thing to take into consideration. So again, back to my sort of just numbers thing about 2, 4, 6, or 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, blah, 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 blah. The amount that you add to the previous number increases each time. Obviously, it is the same number. That's how doubling works. You add the same number to itself, and then you get twice that number. But you know, that number gets larger each time. So at first we're just adding 2, then we're adding 4, then we're adding 8, then we're adding 16, then we're adding 32, then we're adding 64, then we're adding 128. So each time that number gets larger. The difference between the previous number and the current number becomes larger. So the rate of change is increasing. This is one of the things about Moore's law. So as we get to this point, you can see the 4004 to 8008, we went from like 2300 transistors to about 5000 transistors. Difference of 2300 transistors. Up here, the 6-core Xeon 7400 to the 6-core Core i7 is about 1 billion transistors. About, roughly. 2300 transistors, 1 billion transistors, and roughly the same distance between one another on the graph. So the rate of change is ridiculous right now. Who knows what 2017, 2018 is going to look like as far as transistors are concerned? Who knows? I mean, I'm sure there are people who do, but I don't. I haven't actually kept up with that. But yeah. And just realized that there aren't really any, there are AMD chips down here, but none up here. Anyway, the rate of change is increasing. This change has been driven by information technology. So as we understand computers better, we can do more with them. As we refine our manufacturing techniques, we can add more transistors. As we understand logic better, we can apply more efficient gates and more of them on the same thing. As we learn more, we can improve more quickly. And that's so far held true. We've made the transistors that exist on these chips smaller and smaller and smaller as it stands right now. Let me see here. Trying to find a good picture of a set of transistors. As it stands right now. There we go. So we got a few good examples here. Here's some sets of transistors. Like these are whole plates with tons and tons of transistors on them. These are not individual transistors. These are probably thousands of transistors, at least. And we've got some of the different layers that exist on chipsets. Just for your information, this is a picture on the scale of micrometers. So like the width of a human hair kind of thing. Here's 2 micrometers. I'm looking at some transistors here. These are transistors measured in nanometers, which are larger than micrometers, but still nanometers. So transistors have gotten ridiculously, ridiculously small. And as we, like I said, as we understand them better, we're able to improve more quickly. Advances in information technology help to advance other technologies as well, like genetics. I think there's more to this. Yeah, there are. So genetics, information science has been incredibly helpful for that, because in order to understand genes better, we need to sequence them, right? In order to find a correlation between genetic sequence and rare diseases or traits expressed in people, we need to be able to read that DNA and figure patterns out. Now, the cost of sequencing has been closely related to Moore's law. Now, that is until they discovered a way to more efficiently sequence DNA. So as you can see right here, this very precipitous drop, that has to do with the fact that there was another method that was discovered. So again, another example of how we need to find more efficient ways to do stuff that doesn't necessarily rely on Moore's law. But before that, you can see it's very, very, very closely tied to you know, how much Moore's law would affect the ability to sequence DNA. This is 2013. The first human genome sequence that was completed 10 years ago cost $1 billion. 1 billion. It took them $1 billion and years to sequence human DNA for the first time. Now we can sequence an entire human's DNA in a matter of a day or two, and it'll cost well under $10,000. Yeah, it is a lot of money and time. $1 billion to just basically read the instruction booklet for a person. Now we can do it in a day or two instead of years, and it costs, let's see here. So a million is 1/1000th of a billion, and 1,000 is 1/1000th of a million. So this is just a few millionths now. We have reduced the cost to a few millionths of what it used to be. That's such an awkward thing to say, millionths. Anyway, dramatically reduce the cost and time. Now, information technology has helped to advance nanotechnology, a hugely burgeoning thing, widely considered to be one of, like, you know, the sort of up-and-coming cutting-edge sciences that's going to change the world. That's a video, so we're gonna skip that for now. But, you know, nanotechnology being the thing, the science of creating technology on a nanoscale. So when I say nanoscale, I mean nanometers. So tiny transistors. For reference, width of a human hair is 17 to 181 micrometers. So 17 micrometers to 1.8 nanometers. Going back to this picture, these individual objects right here are about 1/8 the width of the thinnest human hair. These right here are larger than the width, not the length, but the width of a human hair. So, you know, if one falls off your head or something like that, and you can look at it, look at how thick it is. And that's what we're talking about when we're referring to, you know, nanometers and micrometers and things like that. Anyway, nanotechnology. Robotics is another one. And actually, let's spend some time talking about that. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about cyborgs. Cyborgs, the word cyborg is a combination of the living and the artificial. I believe there's an explanation as to, cyber-organism, cyborg. That's where the name comes from. Now the following slides are from there. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just had to fix that. The following slides here are actually were created by a college student explaining cyborgs. So we're gonna pop into another person's presentation real quick. So yeah, the differences between cyborgs and robots, because that's something that that's an important distinction to make. They're not the same thing. Cyborgs are a combination of living organism and a machine, which it doesn't necessarily have to be a human. It could be a dog. It can be a bird. It could be whatever. It can be. They do a summer camp for young engineers where you turn big roaches into cyborgs. So that's a thing. A cyborg is a combination of an organism with a machine. It is, a part of living beings. So basically, the robotics aspect, the robot aspect of it, is a part of the living being, and they're typically very complex. Presumably, we don't really have many examples of cyborgs in the science fiction sense. No, really? Uh-oh. Now, robots, on the other hand, they're all machine. Um, they're generally very complex, although they don't have to be, but they're assemblages of machines that are automated, oftentimes, and they require little to no interaction with people. They're also automated machines, so they're not alive, unlike cyborgs. And they can be simple or they can be very complex. Oh yeah, here we go. Cyborg is short for cybernetic organism. It's a combination between a living being and a machine, which is different from a robot. A lot of times we think of cyborgs, the cybernetic part of it, as a means of repairing or overcoming physical and mental constraints. So I believe this is Oscar Pistorius, who recently has become a rather infamous figure. But he before that he was very famous for being somebody who was, a sprinter in the Olympics, but he didn't have legs, which is a pretty big thing. Or at least he was a very well-known sprinter for that reason. Whether or not that actually, improved his ability to run, it's up for debate. But it was certainly a very well-known thing. The idea of a man-machine mixture was popular in science fiction has been popular in science fiction for a long time. In fact, before World War II. 1960, Manfred Clynes and Nathan Kline had combined the words cybernetics and organism to form the term cyborg. So the term's been around since the 60s. And the beginning of the creation of the cyborg, I guess, the beginning of like proto-cyborgs began when computer interaction was developed and started to become a thing. Now, one of these people is Kevin Warwick, not Kelvin Warwick. Kevin Warwick is a professor of cybernetics at the University of Reading, and many believe him to be the world's leading expert in cybernetics. But he fired an array of 100 electrodes into his own nervous system in order to link with the internet to control a robotic hand, a loudspeaker, and an amplifier. So being able to control basically robotic objects with his mind, like a proto-cyborg, the human-computer interface, the way that humans are able to interface with the computer without, technically a mouse and a keyboard are human-computer interfaces, but we're speaking without stuff like that. Yeah, it is pretty incredible. That's more what I'm referring to in the sense of a human-computer interface is without, a mouse and keyboard. But yeah, so he's a fairly well-known dude for that reason. Well, yeah, yeah, only 100. Although I guess it depends on how, how big they are. Probably not incredibly big, but Yeah, they pulled an example from that in Iron Man 3 where Tony Stark injects electrodes into his hands, um, so that his Iron Man suit could be recognized and controlled by him. Next, these things are cool. Um, Vision enhancing contact lenses. Um, Now those aren't really out there in the general sort of public yet, but yeah, it looks like a contact lens, but it, you know, a lot of times it'll have additional stuff on it. I apologize, I don't know what that second bullet point is. We are recognized people very smartly using this. I don't, I can't grok that. I think the maybe he's referring to the possible advancements with the advent of the vision enhancing contact lens. I don't know. It kind of, yeah. I, I. An example of this was used in the Mission Impossible movie. Again, completely fictional, but that's where you know sort of science fiction and science, real life science kind of collide. Is where you get you give possible examples of what this could be like, and in fact, it kind of feeds back into real life because a lot of times stuff like this can be the inspiration for people to develop this sort of thing. You know, when you might be like, okay, so you know we've got this new heads-up display that we can put onto a contact lens. How are we going to design the UI? And maybe somebody growing up was like, man, I really like the Mission Impossible movie. Let's make the UI look like that. And so suddenly it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that kind of thing, you know? Um, People in science fiction imagine futures which help to influence the minds of people who are developing technology, which helps to influence the minds of people who are creating science fiction, and it becomes like sort of a self-perpetuating cycle. And it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Um, but yeah, so basically the vision enhancing contact lens would be something that you could have like a heads-up display always visible without like, you know, Google Glass without the glasses. It's literally Google contacts. Like, no pun intended. But yeah, neurocontrolled bionic arm. Neurocontrolled bionic arm. So neurologically controlled bionic arm. I think that speaks for itself pretty well. Bionic arm you can control with your mind. It's pretty awesome. Now, sometimes these, because part of the tricky thing about this is we don't have really a complete map of the human brain. And that's because the human brain is pretty amazing. Uh, Everybody's brain is different. You'll find that all of your sort of different processing and motor and logic functions and stuff like that all sort of exist in the same general vicinity from person to person, you know, because people are people, not everything's going to be the same size. It's not always going to be in the exact same spot. You're not always going to have, you know, the same sort of organization of everything. In addition to that, um, human minds are very, very adaptable, much more so than we give them credit for. There's a concept that's sort of been gaining traction scientifically over the last 10, 15 years called neuroplasticity, which is the ability for the mind to sort of rewire itself in order to accommodate changing, sort of the changes of the body and the environment around it, and as well as changes within itself. So things like maybe losing one of your hands and the sensory and motor functions in your brain um, sort of reallocate that space to your remaining hand. So your remaining hand will be more dexterous and more sensitive than you would have had otherwise with both of your hands. That whole thing about how like blind people, their other senses are more acute in order to make up for it. That's not, you know, that's not necessarily just anecdotal evidence. There are examples of showing the sensory centers in the brain actually having more space, more brain power devoted to the other senses because there's very little to none that's actually devoted to sight, that kind of thing. Um, Brain power, yeah. But yeah, so that's an example of sort of neuroplasticity, and that's part of the reason why stuff like this can be very tricky, because we're still sort of figuring out how to get everything to respond appropriately and as naturally as we can. In addition, while servos and motors and stuff like that have gotten very good, it's hard for us to send a response back to the brain and give that sort of feedback that we have with, our own appendages. Like you can grab a cup and you can feel the pressure of the cup against your fingers, so you know exactly how hard you're grasping the cup. Um, you can run a hand through like a dog's fur, and you can feel the fur, um, whether it's like coarse or soft or anything like that. And that's not something we can really do with machines right now. We can, if somebody has something like this, they can kind of guess at how hard they're grabbing at something and get a better feel for it, but they don't get the same sort of uh, direct contact that we might get. Um, in addition, making something that mimics the human arm perfectly is a prohibitively expensive thing to do, like insanely expensive. The range of movement and motion that exists within the human arm, we could replicate, but it requires a lot of difficulty, and or it is a lot of difficulty, and it requires a lot of work and money. But we're getting there. We're getting there. Now there's the Boston Retinal Implant Project. The goal of this project is to help people see better, and presumably to I, when he says remember two things better, I'm not entirely sure if it's like any two things. So you can be like, yeah, I want to be able to remember the names of all the Beatles better, and also the capital of North Dakota. Like, or if it's specifically being able to associate names with faces, like if that's the main goal of the Boston Retinal Implant Project. But it is an interesting thing. You got the Touch Bionics IM, which is able to move everything, all of its individual fingers and joints independently. You can adjust how much pressure the grip has. It can be, you can teach it common gestures, things like that. We'll check that out later. We've got bionic feet, so bionic hands, bionic feet. This is kind of a horrifying looking picture. I think this is just photoshopped poorly, but basically an implant for your ear, and also one that goes along your jaw that would be able to basically function as a cell phone. Between the two of them, you would be able to have a cell phone just permanently implanted in your head. Presumably, it wouldn't have strange disfigurement and weird tendrils that look sort of like spider webs running between everything and all that stuff. Though, early prototypes might. And also this weird gash in the ear. Like I feel like this was not the best example of bionic implants, or an illustration of bionic implants. But yeah, you would be able to just have a cell phone in your head. And the stuff about, a microphone being implanted in like a jaw, it's actually, there's a concept like that is already utilized by Bluetooth headsets today. Like if you've ever heard of the Jawbone headset, um, what it does is it has essentially sort of two listening components to it. One is like a very like generic microphone. It picks up your voice. It also picks up surrounding background noise. It picks up the wind blowing, stuff like that. But then there's another one that actually rests against your jawbone and feels the vibrations of your voice coming out of your mouth, matches the two together, throws out, basically anything that doesn't match. And so the person that you're talking to on the phone, you could have all of the background noise in the world, as long as it's not making your jaw vibrate, like as long as you're not using a jackhammer or something like that, it will be filtered out by the Bluetooth headset, and so the person on the other end will just hear you talking to them clearly. It's a pretty insane concept. Pretty ingenious too. There's bone marrow stem cell artificial skin. So this is actually a big thing, because as it stands right now, if somebody needs like a skin graft or something like that, really the only thing we can do is take skin from somewhere else on their body and put it there. We can't exactly, use other people's skin and stuff like that. There's a huge there are a huge number of problems with that. The immune system, the sort of the sebum and stuff like that make up the oils and everything that the skin naturally secretes, the skin's ability to flex and stretch and things like that, even skin color. I mean, you could pull it from somebody who's genetically compatible with you, but then they're going to have maybe a different skin color, and even from a point of view of just like maybe that'll serve to somebody as a constant reminder that they've been through this accident, kind of a thing, But at any rate, this is just basically a mixture of stem cells and artificial skin, which provides the framework for the stem cells, and then the stem cells grow into your own skin. It's not a skin graft. It is your own new skin that exists on your body now. It's pretty creepy, but it's also really cool. Intelligent prosthetic legs that can basically feel like a real leg, as far as how your body moves on it and stuff like that. They have hydraulics that will adjust sort of the pressure and resistance based on whether you're walking or running or going up downstairs slopes, things like that. Artificial lung. It's an artificial lung. Releases carbon dioxide while intaking oxygen, passes oxygenated blood into the heart and beyond. Like it does what a lung does, only it's not real. As in, it's not like a lung. Artificial heart. This is something that's a temporary thing that exists. We don't have them as like permanent things because we don't yet have artificial hearts that can be used permanently. However, there are temporary hearts that exist that are artificial. Obviously, you're not going to be up and walking around with an artificial heart or something like that. Also, this is pumping blood, not pumpkin. But it's something that, they could keep a person alive. Hip joint. Because hip joints are nasty, gnarly things. Everybody's got them. Everybody needs them. and you don't think about it until it gives out. Artificial hearts in science, nice. Artificial pneumatic muscles. Basically, it's just yeah, they don't work very well. That's why they're not. That's why you can't like use them as like a replacement heart. But yeah, my grandmother does too. As a metal hip, a titanium hip. Um, but yeah, gas fills the membrane to simulate the flex and the relax of muscles, which is good for very, very damaged muscles that won't really work anymore. Artificial liver. It's used to filter toxins out of the body when the liver is failing. Maintains production of other things required by the body to function, because your liver does basically a number of things in order to keep you alive. It's not a one-trick pony. It does some of the job of filtration like your kidneys do. It secretes a number of hormones and things like that regulate your body functions and things. It's very interesting. World's first artificial stomach, which obviously this wouldn't go in a person. That's way too big, but it's used to test new medicines and stuff like that and see how the body processes nutrients and specific foods and stuff like that. So, you can test products without having to use living creatures necessarily. But anyway, it's 7:54. We'll go through, well, let's see here. A wearable artificial kidney. Artificial kidneys that you can wear. Anyway, yeah, basically. It's at that time where I should do the poll questions, and we should, go to question and answer time, just so I can make sure I get all that done before I have to go off to my high school class. So let me go ahead and get started with those poll questions now.